This week on New to You, High Fantasy, Part 1, the story of Kalervo. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the New to You Show. We're kicking off a new topic this week with High Fantasy. We've got 4 new picks. So 4 weeks of fantasy coming your way.
Yeah.
All right.
Real high, baby. Real high.
New to You
Stoner
Show
fantasy
is a rate and review podcast where we pick a topic, pick some media on that topic. Everyone takes a take at it. And
Yeah, we don't really rate, do we?
No. I mean, sometimes we do.
Well,
We
it's
do
just-
the Willow comparison.
Yeah, it's whether or not it's
Better
is it
than Willow.
Yeah.
And we
rating it.
consulted with Plapp on the music.
The Oracle
The Oracle.
of Plapp.
Yep. And what was his? Who did you
Huey
say?
Lewis is what
Huey
he
Lewis.
says is the musical standard by which.
But
But
it was a specific song, but I can't remember what song it was.
Hip to be Square, I believe, was the song. that he liked.
No, I don't think it was one of his, because that's kind of his big hit, right?
Or Power of
Or
Love,
one of them.
no?
They're all hits, man. He's
That's
Huey
true.
freaking Lewis.
That's true.
The man cannot not make a hit.
I feel like he had another one that seemed more like
This is it.
equivalent.
This is it.
This is it.
Mm.
You can't let me go. If she come on, she want more and you. Yeah.
That could be it. That could be it.
Yeah, that was the one.
Yeah.
Is that the one where their heads are buried in the sand?
sand, yep.
Yeah. I remember that video very fondly.
Mhm.
Not very fondly. Do they also have Frankenstein remake in that one? Or that was another Huey Lewis?
I have
music
no
video?
idea.
All right.
That was during my MTV free days.
What?
Yeah.
That's sad. That's a sad story.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So before we get into my pick, I'm one of your hosts, John Holt. With me is
One of your other hosts, Keith Vincent, and
Your other host, Julian Cage, and with us, special guest.
Brian Jones.
Hey.
Hello, everybody.
Jones. Good to see you, buddy.
All right. Brian's a good friend of ours. I've had him on Board Ghost before, way back in a while, and I've got to get him back on there again.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been wanting to get Brian on for a while.
Have
for
you
sure.
never been on the New to You show?
I've never been on New to
Oh,
You,
well,
so
welcome.
Wow.
well, thank you. Thank you.
Now
for
we're
the
going to
warm
start our
welcome.
hazing.
All right,
It
all right.
starts-
Stop
with
hugging
this.
me.
Yeah. It starts
All right.
with this. If you were in the band Slipknot, because we can't forget this, because we often forget.
that's true.
If you were in the band Slipknot, what would your mask look like?
Oh my gosh.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Think about this. When
Well, you know what?
when your ticket comes up, when your mark is drawn,
And you have to be in Slipknot.
and you have to be in Slipknot.
I would
surely-
probably have something that's like abnormally larger than my head already is.
So like a pumpkin head kind
Yes.
of thing?
Something like that, just to be a little bit more outrageous.
I'm for it.
Well, feel free to doodle on your
Yeah,
on
yeah,
your
yeah.
notepad.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we
So
got it.
would you
We
like
actually
Jack-
have to start. We have to start our wiki of what each of our guests would be like, and then we should have somebody do artists' renderings.
Sure.
You hear that, super fans out there?
Yep. Something to look forward to when we never do it.
and we need to have our almost like a class photo with the Slipknot main core guys in the front and all of us with our heads just sort of expanding out.
I smell a T-shirt.
Or a bedspread once we get
Or a black velvet
And,
painting.
and matching pajamas.
yeah.
But anyway, we're talking about high fantasy, aren't
Yeah, and my pick is up first. I teased it last week. We'll get right into it.
we? Yeah, let's go.
Recently republished or published as its own thing collection of a manuscript that George R.R. Tolkien called I Finished It. No, by J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who made Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, all that stuff. The Silmarillion, that's his big opus. He early on in his career as a writer and historian and all this stuff and linguist. It was like just before World War I, and he was kind of wrapping up some degrees and getting published. And one of the things that actually he kind of said almost made him fail out of some of his courses was his obsession with a recently published Finnish collection called the Kalevala or Kavala, which was basically a dude went to Finland and collected the oral traditions of the people,
All the old epics.
all the old specifically of Finnish origin, and put them together in this collection of very specific. It was basically at a point when having a national identity was very important to a country, and Finland really got into this and took this on as like, oh, we now have something to call Finnish.
Is that where the like Beowulf and stuff came? I mean,
No, that's different. Those are the Eddas, and that's like
Yeah.
more what, Norwegian or something, or like.
yeah.
So this was specifically from Finland. And there's a little bit of like there's controversy about how it was gathered and how how pure these things are, but it's very.
Hey, wait, John, wait. Did he ever finish them? Did he
Hey.
finish? Did he finish those? Did he?
Yes, he did.
Hey, guys.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So it's this long.
Get it? Because it's from they're Finnish people.
Oh, we got it.
So, okay.
No, but see, his version is not Finnish.
Right. We're gonna get to that one later in High Fantasy Picks. With the never-ending story, Keith. You see? Look at
Yeah.
that. I'm just taking
Never
the joke
finish.
too far.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
I
If
just
you
took
can even
I just
call it
took
a
the
joke.
funny out of that joke almost.
No, I did. Before
Almost.
we started. So anyway, he was obsessed with reading.
So he's obsessed with this
It's
thing
called
that
the Kavala.
it's Kalavea. I mean, I don't.
Kalevala.
Kalevala. It's
Kalevala.
like Kaevala.
K-A-L-E-V-A-L-A.
Yeah. So this is a collection of like what each sort of chapter was called a rune, and there's just these long poetic verses, and they're not epic in that they're not about like gods or mythic in any way. They're more about people on the ground, like this like wizard.
Well, that's where the term epic comes from. Are these this epic poetry?
No, but this is like basically it's distinguished from that in that this is more base and not so much about like people completing Herculean tasks. It's about these people very like mundane and simple and still having like long tales, but they aren't like they're distinguished from the Eddas are more epic and like epic into mythic kind of thing, and this is more like of the people and sort of the small tales, but they're collected and they have some like through story like trickster god type people, but they're more like Merlin-y magicians. And in fact, the main character of this whole thing, who kind of comes in and out, he has his own stories or he's just kind of like tangential to some of the stories in this big like collection, is a character who's pretty clearly like aspects of Gandalf the Grey and White are based on him. And so there's like a lot of pieces.
Is his name Fizbin?
No, it's like Ilmin. I don't know. It's a long Finnish word.
Finnish word.
Yeah. It sounds, listening to it, people read it, the actual like Finnish poem is pretty cool. It's weird, and it actually
Can you hear them? Can you like? Is that on YouTube?
There are
You can
people.
kinda
In fact, there's a girl
hear
who
recitations of it.
there's a girl who because it's also, well, I'll get into. So basically, it's a big like part of the Finnish identity, and it's what they rallied around and became sort of the symbol for their independence from Russia and from the other like northern.
It's interesting. There was a 99% Invisible about this same thing.
The poem.
Not the poetry tradition, but their design. They established a design aesthetic that same time period.
So they're looking for a national identity, and this is something that gives them a culture. And Tolkien at the time was looking for the same thing for Europe. Like there was some Breton. There wasn't like there was Gaelic traditions, but there wasn't like a Bretonian. That's what his Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings is a little bit of like a very British. He wanted a British tale, a folk tale legend for them, and so he was looking to this because it was doing that for the Finns at the time, and today is still celebrated as part of their independence. And so when they have their Independence Day, people will sing these songs, play them. And there were artists.
Sing the poems. Oh, neat.
There's an illustrator. There's some amazing paintings that this guy did, all inspired by these from around that period in the teens and 20s. It's all turn of the century when this stuff was collected and distributed just before World War I, like in the early 1900s, turn of the century, 20th century, late 18th century, early 20th century. And there was this illustrators and painters of some amazing paintings coming out, and then there was a Finnish composer who put together a whole opera about those tales as well. And so he's kind of, a lot of art came up out of it, and again, more things for people to identify with and be specifically Finnish. And there's actually, that's tradition still holds true in that there are people who like like Finnish metal bands are folk metal bands, and they use some of the same cadence and some of the same like tonality, and it's also pretty like epic, like but the descriptions are very like, it's not like, epic's not the full word, it's more like when someone is doing a cheesy like version of a fantasy kind of thing where they're like, and we went up to Skull Mountain and we found the metal sword and it was blah, like,
and lo did we see it.
Yeah, it's
with
that
the flowery language.
It's that kind of stuff, but without as much of the flowery language.
Oh, okay.
So it's, but
I
it's
won't
still,
listen to it because that's all I need.
That's all you want.
I need the yees and the doth thou.
But so to get back to your question, there's like on YouTube, there's a woman who like I found, she does ASMR videos or whatever. And so one of her like sets of ASMR videos is her like coloring, like Finnish coloring books based on this thing and like reciting and like kind of singing the poems at the same time as she does this. And it's,
She whispers them.
yeah.
But does that see, this is where I thought ASMR was just like, it would just be the coloring, wouldn't it? Seems like you'd be distracting from the coloring if you then whispered something.
No, there's a lot of whispering involved. Like also, like one of the things that people like is also when people like drone on about boring stuff, but in this like weird whispering
I need
voice.
to do more. I need to look more into.
Well, it's
this
also
stuff.
it's very
Yes.
specific.
Because I am a very sensitive person when it comes to hearing things like in my like hearing certain voices will give me like the heebie-jeebies and give me like prickles on my neck.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what the whole
it's
thing
like
is about.
It's like a tingling of the top of your head.
Yeah,
and
but
it's
I
a
don't know if I
pleasant
need to.
sensation
I'm
for
just
some-
not certain I need to kind of indulge in it. I just want to learn more about it.
No, I mean it's just like people are like, come here.
Yeah.
Turn off the light and come into the closet.
And that's how Tolkien. That's what
Yeah,
Tolkien.
that's what
how
Tolkien-
Right.
he meant all of the Lord of the Rings to be read in this way. Talk about droning.
Stop.
I can't even.
Shadowfax. So did we? So does it go into the kind of hierarchy? So what does he do? What's the timeline of Tolkien? He wrote The Hobbit first, right? And then everything else came after that, correct?
No.
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 He was exploring and building the language and doing little essays about the Silmarillion. And this one specifically, he's not writing like this isn't a study of these poems. So what he did is he was playing with translation. Like before he went and wrote his own legends and even backstory for those legends and wrote these big epic tales and The Hobbit, which is this sort of smaller kickoff tale for that. He was at first a historian who was in like this is his germ getting interested in this stuff, and he was already writing like the Children of Hurin comes out of this kind of thing. Children of Hurin is one of his first like big epics.
But does it happen in Middle Earth? Is it a part of the
I think the Children
Middle
of Hurin
Earth cinematic
does.
Yes,
universe?
isn't like Children of Hurin like what's part of the first stage of
Yeah.
the men, and what we know as Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is
Right.
part of the Third Age,
Third Age, yeah.
and ending of the Third Age,
Right,
and Silmarillion is obviously all before that.
right. And so
before the first age?
yeah, it's like the Silmarillion is about it's the epic creation of the thing and where the sources of evil Morgoth, who Sauron is the lieutenant of, comes from, and all this stuff. And so Tolkien was looking at these tales, and he specifically with the story Calervo is a tragic figure in this epic, and so he's one of the few like true tragic figures in the entire story in all these runes. He's the one who, and this is specifically to the runes. Basically, his father had a brother, right? So you have these two brothers, like the
These are
father's-
in the finished.
This is in the
stories.
finished tale,
Okay.
and they're very similar. I mean, when I tell you the Tolkien's one, it's just the names are different, really. So you have two brothers, one of whom is like a fisherman and has a fishing village, and the other one is jealous of this. He doesn't have the same stuff, and so he goes and raids the fishing village and basically fights and kills his own brother, right? And tries to takes what is his and absorbs. It doesn't kill all the women and takes the pregnant women into his own household. And so this boy is born of his mother in thraldom, in servitude, as a slave, basically, to his uncle, who's a bad dude.
And the father, the fisherman guy, his name is Kalervo, and his son is Kalervo. It's not confusing at
No,
all.
Right.
Doesn't sound confusing to me.
And then
The dad, the uncle's name is like Umamnu or something like
Yeah.
Umamu or Unama or Unamu. whatever.
Dormammu?
It starts with a U and
at
has
least
an O.
at least for a while until he starts switching names and stuff.
Right. And
Why
then
would
they,
you do that?
Because it's an unfinished manuscript, and he's playing around with the names,
Yeah.
and he's adding nicknames. Like halfway through, like all the names change, and I was
Right.
like, "What the hell
It's
is
like
going on
This
here?"
is like Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
There's honorifics and different like patriarch. There's like all kinds of different ways,
Yeah.
and he's also starting to bring in the language he's creating is having its origins in him playing with this retelling.
Right, yeah.
So in the original tale, there's this child, and so again, these are early people. They're magical at base, and so both these uncles were magical, and this kid is magical, and they try to kill the kid 3 times over and fail each time, and then like, all right, we'll put this kid to tasks. We'll see how it goes, and he's just not. He's uncontrollable. He's wild. And so they sell him to, in this large tale, there's this kind of like god of the forge, like a Hephaestus kind of guy. And they sell him as a slave to this Hephaestus guy. And so he works with this guy, and the wife of this Hephaestus guy is really mean. She's like there's a whole backstory about how he got her as a wife or whatever, but she's nice to him and they dote on one another, but she's like kind of a bad person. So she's really cruel to this kid and says, hey, I want you to go out in the far field. The only thing he has left of his father at this time is this like heirloom knife. And so she's like, here's some bread, go out, take the cattle out, and then come back at the end of the day. And he goes to cut the bread, and she's put stones in the bread, and his knife breaks on it. So he curses the cows.
Cheap trick, man.
Yep. He curses the cows so that they turn into bears and go kill the wife and eat her. And so this kid who's magical then just runs away. He like meets a woman who's like maybe his one salvation. Like, oh, I could find this woman, find happiness, sleeps with her. Then they both realize, oh, this is my long lost sister. And so he slept with his sister. She kills herself out of like sorrow because this is a terrible thing to have happened. And now he's like bent on destruction against his uncle even more. And so he goes back, and his like a lot of his family has kind of like found themselves again. The father's somehow is actually still alive. The mother's alive. Like basically his brothers and sister and mom are like, look, don't do this revenge. Just come back. And he's like, no, I'm going to kill everyone. And he's on his path of vengeance, doing this destruction, using his powers, using his, magic strength to wreak havoc. And he keeps getting reports that his family members are getting sick and ill and dying. And aren't you going to come back and like help put their souls to rest? And he's like, no, I have a job to do. Kill. And he comes back and he sees that everyone he's loved is dead, and he's like, okay. And he tells his sword to kill him, and so his sword kills him. He kills himself by his own sword. And so but the whole tale, the whole reason this tale is in there, the bard, the one I told you is sort of the overarching character in this whole thing, the Gandalf, kind of chimes in and is like, that's why you shouldn't abuse your kids. That's why like basically saying there's that old adage, like a bent twig won't grow into a straight branch kind of thing.
Right.
So it's this idea that if you abuse a child at a certain point, that cruelty will make a cruel adult, and there'll be no salvation for that adult. And so Calvero is a tragic figure in that from the get-go, he is treated poorly by Kalervo, by everyone around him, and his powers just turn towards this anger and eventually his own self-destruction. So he's just a destructive force. So Tolkien takes this tale, this one tragic figure, and retells it. And he's, like you're saying, Jules, kind of exploring character. He got through about 2/3 of it, and the back third, the last act, is just a sketch, like a little outline of like, here's what happens for the rest of this. Pretty much the same tale. Two brothers, one is a fisherman, the other is jealous, and a neighbor, and starts like netting inside the fisherman's thing and stealing his crops. So he's like, stop that. They're both wizards. They weave spells against one another. They go to war. The bad uncle takes the boys hostage and takes the mother, takes the children, kills the father, all this stuff. And the same kind of thing where this kid grows up. He's got a dog, a magic dog, who's also in the tales, but in this is given like a more prominent role. So he has a magic dog who helps him survive the 3 different ways of being like potentially killed. Like they try to drown him.
The trials.
Yeah, so they try to drown him, and
he kind of derives his magical powers from this,
right?
And it was his father's beast or whatever.
Beast, right? And so, like, the dog gives him 3 hairs and says, "When you're in trouble, call my name, and I'll save you." And so the first thing they do is they try to drown, because he's very young. He's like almost an infant, and the first thing he says is, "I'm going to wreak revenge on my uncle. I'm going to kill him." And the uncle overhears this, and he's like, "All right, I got to take care of this kid."
Yeah, because his mom was like, telling him what happened.
Right. So, and the mom's despondent and neglectful of the child, and he has a twin sister in Tolkien's run, and that's Winona. That's the one who he'll eventually sleep with and kind of ravish, and then they'll both realize, and she kills herself. I think she jumps off a waterfall. So he's a same kind of like trilogy thing, where they attempt to drown him. They put him in a barrel, throw him down the river. The next thing they see him, he's like just hanging out fishing, so he's fine. The second thing they do, they try to burn him.
And it was when he did this where Tolkien was like,
yeah.
I'm going to have to remember that barrel thing.
Yeah.
That's
The
pretty
barrel
cool.
ride. Pretty
I'm
fun.
gonna save that one. Put that one
Yep.
in my old little bag of tricks.
Exactly. So they try to
burn
burn him, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, and then
He has like some sort of like miraculous escape from that.
And they try to hang him.
Try to hang him, and they come back, and he's just like carved fun things into the tree and has gotten down and is alive. Like he's got a little knife and he's fine. So they've realized, all right, he's indestructible. Let's just try to make him do work. And
But how did the dog help him with the hanging part?
it just made like the dog's magic helped him. Like he called on the dog to survive the situation, and his own as he's working with the dog now, his own powers start to manifest. Like he's not been killed, he's coming into his own. So they're like, well, we're not going to try to kill him. That hasn't worked. We'll try to make him do work. Like we'll just send him out in the field to like cut trees. And so he goes to cut trees, and he's just like hacking and slashing and hill-nil, just making a mess of things, destroying trees that he shouldn't be killing yet. Like just it's a mess. It's unusable. And then they'll go like, all right, well, that's not working. Let's take him fishing. And he'll go and thresh the water and turn all the fish into soup. Like just kill, like he's just so strong, so like powerful. He's like a small force of nature who has no bounds or controls, and basically will any task he's given, he overdoes to the point of destruction and out of spite. And so eventually, again, in Tolkien's tale, sells him to this blacksmith whose wife is very mean, and she does the whole thing again. Like eventually makes him go out, take the cows out into the fields, and gives him the bread that he breaks his knife on. All that stuff still happens. And so here in this one, he calls on the wolves and the bears to come and eat all the cows. And he takes one of the best cows and fashions like a bone flute out of it. And then using that bone flute's magic, he turns all the bears and wolves into cows that they've just eaten, like kind of make them look like it, and says, you'll be that way until you get to this woman, to the wife of this thing, and then you're going to eat her. And so he kind of uses his flute to like walk them along, and eventually unleashes them on the woman. And she has this long like song about like how I don't trust this kid. What's she gonna do to my cows? Somebody's like protecting my cows. And then has a very long like song about dying, like don't let me die here kind of thing, like while the wolves and bears are eating her. And it sort of ends with like a But so then again, same thing. Like he goes on a
he carved
yeah. So yeah, so they
and there's a lot of songs throughout the whole story.
right, and that's very like Tom Bombadil, like intermixing prose and poetry, like people sort of singing their intentions, and so it's a interesting things he's already playing with. Yeah, so that's the tale. There's also a couple essays after that in this little like collected volume that are his like scholarly look, like essays that he actually presented, little talks that he gave about these tales and sort of why he was interested and fascinated in them. And it seems like he never completed this project. It seems like it just kind of fell off because he went off to World War One. His number came up and he was out to fight in the Great War, and this project sort of went to the wayside. And then he began, I think, from there his other projects more in earnest, like the Silmarillion and some of his other like explorations in preparation for his the work we know him for today. So it's interesting to see these tales and how they're still
so
influential.
the chronology is he wrote the Silmarillion before the rest.
Well, see,
He
the
at least started it,
Silmarillion is more like
I don't believe that.
but it's-
The Hobbit is so obviously like
but the idea
the first.
but
foray.
the idea is that the Hobbit is the first completed manuscript within the world, kind of thing. Like
and the
it's
Silmarillion is kind of a collection of
It's kind of an outline
short
of
stories
right.
and
It's like
various
so. It's
things,
like
right.
so it's excerpts and
I feel like
exercises.
I feel like that's some revisionist history. I kind of feel like that's like, no, I've been working on this forever.
Well,
no, I made all the other Star Wars movies before I made this one.
No, but see, the idea is the difference. It's more like it's more like when they publish his early script and storyboards as Starkiller. That's what the Silmarillion is. Yes, he wrote Starkiller, the script, before he put out the movie. That doesn't mean that like the Silmarillion came out after these things.
Yeah, well, his son
it's
edited
just the
it.
language.
Yeah.
The language feels totally different.
I think part of it is that, I mean, in a way,
It's developmental too.
I think part of it is that The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, like that was like written to be, published, and he was probably working with editors and all that kind of stuff, and it was meant to be more like broad public. I feel like some of this other writing he did was a little bit more like esoteric,
Self-exercise.
and if it wasn't for the success of those books, like they never would have gotten published,
Right.
Because they were a little too esoteric and weird,
And they're also
extra nerdy.
basically his setup was like he even says like I tried to learn Finnish to enjoy these in their natural like language, and it was just too big a barrier. And what he was kind of playing with was, what if I had a language and these like The Hobbit was written in or translated initially into this language I made up. What names and what concepts would come over if I were to write it now in English, like in British?
He was
English?
like, well, I can't learn Finnish, so I'll just make up a new language.
Right.
I don't know. I think a
'Cause
lot of
then
this
I'll know.
sounds a little self-aggrandizing. It just all sounds like salesmanship.
Well, no, but that's the thing.
Because
it
like,
is
what
salesmanship,
about the
but
ethics of it? Kind of like because if you read Lord of the Rings and you read and so many of the concepts are right there in Wagner, like in the Ring Saga,
Yeah.
and all those things. It's just kind of like, so how much of this is just like how much?
Well, no, but that's the idea.
It's kind of like a repackaging of somebody else's culture.
But
almost.
that's why the Finnish tale is so interesting too, because it is a repackaging of
Right,
a
that's what I'm
bunch of
talking about, yeah.
But like the Finnish, what I'm saying is these Finnish tales
Uh-huh.
draw from all sorts of other mythologies of that era.
But that happened naturally. That happened through the evolution of storytelling
Right, so-
and the nature of.
So what he's exploring is I'm
is
going
like,
to,
no, I'm going to be the natural evolution as opposed to allowing it to be a folk tradition.
he's constructing it himself. Like he was going out of his way to generate a tale that had that he like. I don't think he was trying to pass it off as brand new ideas. In fact, I think like he would be like, yeah, definitely. I was totally like, that's awesome that you found these other sources that that parallel my mythology. So, but Brian, you were going to say?
No, I mean, I can definitely give any comments to Silmarillion, and that more or less, reads in this more of this historical narrative of through song and poetry, but then also through a world that he was creating that was full of magic, and that The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is a book where magic is there, but it's not so clear and apparent, and it's dying in a world. So like he wanted to create something that was this backlog to this larger narrative that obviously his publishers pushed him to create.
Yeah, and that's similar to the Song of Ice and Fire. Like sort of all the backstory he's got for the world is like where all the cool magical stuff happens, and then now it's like kind of more mysterious and in the past. And
well, it's reemerging, and it's
Right. And not a lot of people believe in it or don't think it's real or things like that. And that's you could totally see that right through Lord of the Rings and things like that. It's like, oh, I cannot believe that there are trees that talk, and then all of a sudden you see one, and then now this is part of an old world that I don't know.
Mhm.
Right. And similarly, like George R. Martin is drawing from, what he says, like War of the Roses and 100-Year War. Like there are these wars and sort of epic, medieval things that have happened that he's drawing in to give himself a guide, like interesting things to like fantasize a little bit. But I also wanted to start, like in terms of high fantasy, we haven't really talked about that at all. I wanted to start with this because I think like when we talk about high fantasy, the definition as I kind of see it is where you have magic, like magic races, and this sort of like technology takes a back seat to magic in some regards, and science and magic is the science of the world.
And another qualifier that I read was that it's another world. It's not our world.
Right.
It's like a brand new universe kind of thing. It's not based in art, whatever.
In our
It can't be
reality.
high fantasy if it happened in like Japan in the 1600s. It
Right.
could just be fantasy.
Right. So that's one of the
erotic fantasy.
Yeah, and there was arguing online when I was looking into this that whether or not Game of Thrones, or Song of Ice and Fire is high fantasy. Some people argue it's not
What's their reason for not?
Discounted
because it's. I mean, it is another world, but there's not a lot of the high fantasy elements. Like
Fucking dragons.
yeah, but there's only
Like
3
fucking people who swap their face magic.
But they're it's like just
talking to wolves in your brain.
But I think that's part of why I like it as well. It's just sprinklings, and it's like.
Yeah. Well,
But,
it's
I mean,
keeping the mystery and.
But I think it's also, just nerds like to argue about stuff on the internet. And the other thing.
Yeah, but especially Game of Thrones.
But to what you were saying, Brian, too, if Game of Thrones is in the fourth age where all this stuff is, where magic has totally passed out of the world.
Well, they even call it they do give it ages, right? The Andals, the First Men, the
Right,
Andals,
right.
yeah.
And so,
this is the fourth age.
There are very few non-humans left in the world.
Mhm.
Like they find the children of the forest who are sort of like your brownies
And
or
a few
elves.
giants, a sprinkling of giants.
Right,
a
but
few-
it's like pretty minimal, like non-human races left in the world. But yeah, I don't know.
They are kind of key in some spots though as well. But
Well,
so
I
don't
guess
know.
I guess the question too is because there's like I don't know, there's like an epic quest feeling to a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah, I think it's a mid fantasy. It's
Mid
not a low
fantasy.
fantasy.
What?
It's not high fantasy. It's like middle fantasy.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen it
No.
categorized as
It's a high. It's got to be. I mean, it's a high fantasy. I mean,
people
it's
call it a
different
grim
world,
dark.
it's
I mean, which might be a different. What's that term?
But
Can you
isn't that a
define
subgenre of?
high fantasy, or it might just be
I
a
don't know.
fantasy subgenre? Grimdark is where you have like a visceral realism to the tales. So when things are a little nitty gritty and harsh, and they're stripping away sort of the like, ooh,
not so much
magic.
unicorns, way more rape.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean.
Or unicorn rape.
Yeah.
yeah. Which is that's what grimdark kind of gets into. And there's
Okay.
I mean, it's again like you can have brutality and like violence and tragedy in like a high fantasy. Like again, Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons, all these things kind of like they come out of specific sources, and he was distilling a lot of those European, Arthurian, and other British ideas.
He also wrote something that was like a kind of his take
He
on
wrote
Arthur.
he
right?
wrote a similar like
Oh, really?
the life or the death of Arthur, the fall
Mort
of Arthur.
d'Arthur? No, that's
No, that wasn't that one, but
It's like another short story kind
Oh.
of thing.
right. But it's specifically looking at like the Arthur tale, and he wanted his tale that he was writing was a non-Christian version of an epic. Like, because he didn't consider Arthur part of that epic because it was an extension of the Christian, like
The Holy Grail
mythology,
stuff.
the Grail and Percival, which was also a more continental concept. So it was also
what
like
the search for the Holy Grail concept was like.
Percival.
Yeah, like the Crusades kind of
Yeah.
a extension.
So it was, I think that this, Tolkien is probably in the last century the father of what we think of as like high fantasy fiction.
He really kicked it off.
Yeah, it'd be hard to kind of argue anyone else being more influential in that way.
Yeah, right.
For all the reasons you had mentioned in previous episodes months and months ago about how there was like a resurgence of his a resurgence of appreciation of him in the 60s that kind of led to those were the teachers that taught our teachers that taught our teachers that that suddenly became like a classic.
Right. And again, I think it's the movies that kick-started publishing more of his old works and getting people to read those again outside of their context as like just,
because they're like,
annotations.
We're running out of books. We got to make more books for Peter Jackson to make movies out of.
Yeah, I have to say, trying to read this, and I kind of gave up about a third of the way through, was frustrating. I definitely, it's funny because I had skipped the introduction. I was like, well, maybe I'll come back to this. I just want to jump into the story.
Because she kind of explains how to read it in the introduction.
Right, yeah. So I got about a quarter of the way there, and I started to get really confused, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? So I went back and read the intro, and I was like, oh, this is like an unfinished rough thing.
I also, though,
that's why it makes no sense.
I do recommend reading it.
Don't skip the preface.
Yeah. I mean, I read it on the Kindle, and
yeah, that's what I did also.
Every sentence in at least the first like part of the thing had a footnote and a jump, or like so there's all kinds of like this means this means this, like you really like there's a little bit of scholarship to ingest this thing.
Yeah,
the tale's very simple,
but it was the way it was unfinished made it hard to enjoy just as a tale for me anyway. I was just like, I found all the gaps and the changing of names and all this stuff just kept throwing me off. And I don't know. I also was kind of like, if I was Tolkien, I was like, I would be sad that they rummaged through my drawers and basically like published my college noodlings. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like if someone published my like
sketchbook.
My college sketchbook, and I'm like, oh.
I mean,
no one was meant
always
to
weird
see
for
this.
any artist. It's like I can imagine if anything that I didn't want published.
I mean, you guys had already mentioned that Cimmerian, or I'm sorry. I keep.
That's all right.
I don't know.
Cimmerian. Thank you. That his son kind of like went through and painstakingly kind of like reassembled it and edited it and whatnot. I'm really surprised that nobody took a pass at this in that way.
Well, the woman did who collected this, and it is like they actually have scans of the manuscript that she's working from.
That is neat to
it's a very rough like sketch that she put together in a good way, and there's scholarship in it. Really, this thing is
kind of like in a museum when they put together an old broken vase and they leave the places obvious where they don't.
Right, because they don't want to, when it's a dinosaur and they make, and basically, because sometimes you'll go to a dinosaur and they're like, it's a whole dinosaur. And then they show you that, there's a
extrapolated from
3-inch by 2-inch piece that we made this entire dinosaur based on.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's truly based on a bunch of other dinosaur pieces that they found elsewhere, but this one they made a bunch. Everything is plaster cast except for this little piece of skull or whatever. But the essays that he has in the back, which are more about those are talks that he gave and essays that he wrote about this.
See, I thought those were the not Tolkien's, but this person who studied his works. Essays.
No, those were 2 essays by him.
And this was when he was at school?
No, this is a little later. This is like in 1919.
Okay.
So this is a little when he's teaching, or like like in the first one, it's even like, hey, I wasn't supposed to be part of your regularly scheduled panel, but here's something I'm into. Why don't you, if you guys will humor me, let's go through this. And he's just kind of elucidates.
I know this is a gathering of people who are into French romantic poetry, but what about Finland, y'all?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about Finland folk stories.
So there's definitely like this piece is more interesting for scholarship. Like basically what I would do is, if you really like Tolkien and you want to know more about like things that inspired him, go to the Oxford translations, which are better translations than he was reading of these Finnish works, and read that, and then go read this, or like read the essays on it to understand why he liked them, and then jump back and read these tales, because they're fun and interesting, and there's a reason. Like he a lot of what he's writing about in his essays is how they inflamed his mind, and they really like got him excited for this world and these characters that
I'm so excited. I got to rip all these off.
Yeah,
I'm so inspired.
But
I gotta make my own wizard that's just like this guy.
But again, his passion was looking at the Finnish people and saying, "Hey, this is a story that the peasants have all been circulating for a long time that kind of tells their early days. I want to do that.
I need to appropriate these for England.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but do you think it told? I mean, it was more like it was just entertainment for them. I don't think it told of their early days. I think it was just like, well, we're bored and we get the our favorite storyteller to come over here and
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how much of it would be like
sagas
the
is the word I was
sagas or the other
thinking of,
ones.
yes.
Yeah, it has some of
Sorry.
that. But yeah, it's telling about like the people who settled in these areas and sort of things that happened and
Yeah, but they're more like Paul Bunyan and
yeah, they've got that like
Yeah.
quality
like-
to them.
They're like pagan folk tales.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like Paul Bunyan, he got mad and he dragged his pitchfork and that made the river.
Yeah.
And that's what these stories are like.
And I think too, like this was a period of time where people were recognizing that the world with industrialization was shrinking, and when the world shrinks, these little some of the magic starts to like pour out as more stuff becomes known, as more light is shined around. There's less people imagining what could be in the darkness, and because they just start to know what's in the darkness and know that it's bad people. I don't know, or coal
It's
coal
industry, yeah.
machines,
Yeah.
but. Yeah, so that you get a development where people are going and saying like, well, let's gather up these tales of people who are like living in the mountains of Appalachia who came from Scotland, because Scotland is getting industrialized and globalized already.
Well, they did do something. I don't know
they
if you
did,
know
yeah.
the story about the song. So there were people
Mhm.
that came together.
yeah,
with-
that's like
yeah.
specifically what I'm
Yeah.
referencing. Like there were
There was a song singing tradition that was actually truer to the traditional songs of Scotland than actual Scotland itself, because they were so sheltered.
right,
Yeah.
and but that those people were gathering those tales before they were lost.
Yeah.
And in Finland, it was specifically, there are people who had the leisure time to have these scholarly pursuits, but also it was serving like a tradition, a national identity for them. So it served a dual purpose. And yeah, so
And no more than a triple purpose, because then it inspired a great writer to write
Right.
great stuff.
and a number of people. I mean, these translations were
no, I
all
think
over.
he's the only person ever inspired by these things. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
So when did this? So this was officially published when? This.
I don't know the publication. I know that he was like he worked on it sometime between like 1950.
Oh well,
to
this was never
1917.
published until like recently, though, right?
Yeah, like in this format
Right.
and form, like within the past 5 years or something.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty recent.
Yeah, and they're releasing a couple more of these things right recently, like Baron and Luthien.
Mm-hmm.
Is another one that I think ties into a little bit of what he's written before. So he has all these other side stories that are just branches, if not totally separate.
Right, that tell other tales.
I remember I always found it suspicious because that's just my nature. But when Dr. Seuss died, there was a similar thing where it's just like, we went through his drawers, we found all these stories that somebody made. It's just like you could really kind of tell that even if these were like a thumbnail sketch in his notebook, somebody else extrapolated it, because
Right.
it feels totally different, and it's kind of sad. I just those things always
Yeah.
make me like, because you can tell they're just a money grab.
Right.
Yeah. Or
You know,
what was
like
the big
Tupac
one?
still putting out records.
Or what was the big one recently? Harper Lee had her
Yeah,
new book out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Go Get a Watchman or something.
Yeah.
So I heard that's pretty good. I mean, Harper Lee's language is really nice. No
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Yeah, that machine learning algorithm's getting pretty good at
Yeah, it really is.
writing new versions.
I understand it's speaking its own language to itself. It's how fast it's learning.
but yeah, it's interesting to see, like, there's some, I don't know how tied it is to, like, European identity and all that stuff too, and there's tons of, that's the one thing to watch for and be cautious of, is when you have people who are like creating mythologies and national identities, and it becomes a nationalist movement. And
Well, I mean, you can see that happening in the Wagner stuff,
mm-hmm.
which influenced very much, is that the dwarves have like almost specifically like Hebrew names, and they're all very
Gold loving,
Jewishy kind, like with like what these people consider to be Jewish traits. So like even within this literature that's supposed to be like a part of the culture, there's kind of working in these political historical things that
Right.
Wagner was a very terrible like anti-Semite. So
Right.
you push here, you pull there, and this stuff's in everything. Every translation of the Bible's got a little different thing in it based on who's writing it and who's involved.
Right.
It's you always have to look out for that stuff.
Right. And also where you are in the time.
The context.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say in terms of context, to like go wider, and Brian, you might be able to speak to this, like Tolkien was, he was someone who was very aware of industrialization and the loss of, innocence and village identity, and was also very aware of the ravages of war and epic upheaval in people's lives.
And how it affects regular people.
And how it affects the regular people. And that's,
Could you imagine, that's the thing, if you had gone through World War I, and this is all speculation, I mean, how could you write anything except about the
Wonder
terrible
Woman.
stuff that happened in World War I?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's crazy.
Yeah, but then also, you write fantasy, and you write these worlds that are part of the escapism. Obviously, we live in the age of escapism.
Yeah.
But if this is just only part
Is
of
it the third age of escapism?
No, but even so, there's only you only had a handful of things. You had your radio, and you had a handful of books that can really bring you out into another world.
Yeah.
Us, talking about high fantasy, is that even just within him, I think his whole turn, especially with The Hobbit, but then especially Lord of the Rings, was his experience in the war.
I believe that.
Yeah.
all right.
In The Hobbit, it was like the original Hobbit, all the leaders of his campaign were buffoons, and they kept getting them into trouble over and over again. I bet you that's definitely what it felt like if you were an English soldier at the time. I mean, no disrespect to English people, but I'm sure that's what the soldiers felt like.
Right.
Like there, yeah.
Well, I'm sure a lot of inexperienced people on this epic scale, dealing with this, having that to lead up.
I will say that's one of the major tenets of the movie that I wish they didn't do away with. And if you read the book The Hobbit and then you compare it to the movie, that's one of the main things that they kind of veered away from, is the fact that The Hobbit, the dwarves are all blowhards and idiots. They're causing so much of the trouble that they're in.
Exactly.
Well, but the thing
in
is,
this they made some of them heroes. And it was just
the thing is,
he
only had 12 hours to tell all of what's in The Hobbit.
That's true.
I mean,
True.
Right.
Yeah, and plus he had to add more stuff that
I
wasn't
know.
in the books,
He had
or
to
expand on them.
Yeah.
so-
He had to make sure there was room for filler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
you can't have all that stuff in there.
How else are you going to have a dwarven, elven, romantic through story,
Right,
unless
right.
you really give it the time to develop?
Well, also you want to see a guy who's basically like a monster face,
Yeah,
who has
yeah,
a
yeah.
real elf face, but he's a monster face underneath
Mhm.
his elf
Yeah.
face. That's important to see.
Yeah, I wanna
Those
see
are like
that.
concepts that you really want to cross.
And I really want to humanize the orcs. That's, you know what? Thank you, Peter Jackson, for doing that, in a way that Tolkien couldn't do. You know what I mean? Give us not one, but two orcs that we
Yeah.
really want to,
Well, also
get to know what makes them tick.
the sexiness of two slimy creatures in
Mhm.
a cave,
Mm-hmm.
one of whom's invisible and the other one who can see in the dark.
Yeah.
And just the
What happens?
flirtation of the riddle game.
Could happen anytime.
just be like, oh, you waste my precious.
So tricksy.
Oh,
So tricksy, Hobbit.
Oh, I smell the fishes. They
What's
just
in
couldn't-
my pockets?
It's how do you? How is Andy Serkis going to pull that off?
Right.
Don't worry, he can do it.
Yeah.
This is why. So this is my another major flaw I have with the Hobbit movies is now they can never have a Gollum meets King Kong because Andy Serkis is both of them. Is really bad forethought.
What,
in my opinion.
he can be both.
No.
They can capture
I don't
both
think they can
performances
do it.
separately,
No,
and
he
then
has to act
and
to
then-
somebody.
Right.
Well, no,
to a mirror.
Well, all right. So if you watch, there are the extended versions,
Mm.
right? There's 7 hours each, and they don't actually
Who
show
has
you
the time?
exactly. They don't actually show you, but the elves blow on a horn,
Yeah.
and Kong comes out and throws the barrels into the water. And that's how they get in the water.
So they don't actually interact.
Yeah, they were like, Jackson, this is a 40-minute scene with Kong talking to the elves and then playing the song and singing the song of Kong.
Well, you have to have the Kong song. Yeah.
right.
Totally.
And so they're just. It was like it's. I mean, it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but like it's.
I didn't
not,
see it. I didn't see the extended version.
I mean, and it's true to the book, but
did they make him
No,
with armor or
So he
something?
climbs the Elvish Tower, and then the eagles fly
Yeah.
around him, and
He
and
hits
he's
swats.
like, yeah, he swats at them,
Yeah.
and they're like, yawn, yawn, because the eagles sing, and so you get to see their like translation of what they're saying. But
is
it's
is
beautiful.
Galadriel like? Does he snatch up Galadriel and take her up
Huh?
there? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
No, he gets one of the horses. He had a different kink back then.
Gotcha.
In the
Gotcha.
third age.
Like dance for me, horsey.
Yeah. So
I've
he
been throwing these barrels,
yeah.
and I hope nobody gets a hammer. I hope nobody gets a
my
hammer and
God.
smashes them.
But anyhow, they were like the ramp was just a backup. They just had it because they had already built. They tore down like most of northern Britain to build all the sets because they had already torn down New Zealand.
And now with Game of Thrones going on, I mean,
Oh,
they're
I
gonna
know.
all of Ireland is gonna be gone. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Who keeps letting these people make movies?
Yeah, just
Right.
tearing them down, build them up.
Jesus.
So I would go find yourself. I don't know. It depends on what direction you like to research stuff. If you're really into Tolkien,
I would say first read all of his finished works.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You know,
Wait.
and then-
His finish.
works. That's what we're talking about.
Nice. With two ends.
Yeah.
Finished. Finished.
So
works.
I'd say if you are a Tolkien or you've read some Tolkien or you like the movies, I would read those books. At
If
least
you're a
The Hobbit.
completionist, if
Yeah.
you're
Then I would say before going too deep into the Silmarillion, I don't know. There's stuff because there's
well, you got to read it. The movie's coming out.
basically the character
Really?
Termin.
I think they're making the love story one, the one with the elves.
Turin, whatever character that is. Turin is the one who
Turin.
Turin,
No,
T-U-R-I-N.
that's another one I saw reference
who
with
was the-
this book.
He's the one. He's the one who is like very much based on like he's the cursed character who has
Right.
like a tragic affair with his
Okay.
sister and all this stuff. Like that character is
Sigmund,
no
Siegfried.
no Oedipus.
Oedipus?
Siegfried is the guy in in the Ring Saga that happened.
Oh,
to
in
which
the
that
in the
happens, yeah.
okay, but yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot of that going on all the time.
All
But
the
have they done
time.
like a biopic film about Tolkien yet? I guess maybe once they've exhausted
yeah, so
all
look
his
who's
stories.
Tolkien. He's like,
Who's Tolkien now?
Wow.
And Bruce Willis plays him.
Yeah.
Oddly.
but that's the funny thing. It's like, look who's Tolkien, and they cut to Bruce Willis, and that's kind of the end of the movie because he's playing.
Yeah, but when he's doing the voice of the sperm that's
Oh,
going
yeah.
in there, and
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Like, "Whoa." And then they.
Wow. I don't ever want to even picture that movie again in my life.
Well, you know Sacha Baron Cohen's in it.
Oh,
Yeah.
He plays the bad guy who's trying to steal all his stories.
But he has a good
That's right.
he has a good song in it too, though. It's low fantasy. It's
a low fantasy song.
yeah, that's,
And the way he rhymes it with slow fantasy,
yeah.
really smart. Really smart.
But I mean, Hella Bonham Carter is his maidservant.
Mhm.
Like, it kicks it up a notch.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's sassy. It's sassy.
And
But the end when he meets Alan Turing, it's kind of like an interesting. They kind of
Yeah.
have like a. It's just like a really neat like a crossover.
Yeah,
Yeah, Cumberbatch plays him in
Yeah.
that too.
yeah. But it's really like he breathes fire on Tolkien, and Tolkien survives it. It all. I don't know. It comes off well. I don't want to spoil it, but he does survive. They're actually able to
Well,
find.
I mean, no one's gonna kill Bruce Willis. You know what I'm saying?
Right. But they are able to they're able to find the like one missing scale in Turing's hide and drive an arrow into it, which is amazing. You get it?
Yeah, because it was Cumberbatch was the Alan Turing and
I get it.
Smaug.
Got it.
Did anyone else pronounce it Smaug before the movie came out?
Smaug.
Yeah,
I just said smog.
I always said
Smog.
smog. Was that? I guess
said
that was
Yeah.
wrong.
Well,
Yeah.
how did they say it in the? Because
in the movie
the
they said
Rankin Bass.
smog.
How did they say it in the Rankin Bass one?
Oh, I feel like they said smog in that
Smog.
because that would have been
Yeah,
my
I
first.
It sounds like
reference.
smog.
Yeah, I said smog, but I saw that movie first,
Smog
and then
the
I read the
Dragon.
book. Yeah, so maybe.
Yeah,
Well, go read Tolkien.
yeah. And if you want to go deep, the story of Kalervo is an interesting one to kind of find out where, like, a path that he took.
Is it the story? Is that the way Kalervo?
Kalervo? Yeah.
Yeah, Kullervo.
Yep, Kalervo. And I would go listen to some people reading some of the tales. It's fun just to hear the
Yeah.
finish and the cadence. It's very unique. And if you're into mythologies and folk tales, the translation, like I said, the Oxford translation's pretty good and
Yeah, I kind
tells
of
the
wish I'd read that because that's finished.
tale. But yeah, so that's it. That's my pick.
Yeah. So let's start. Mieleni minun tekevi, aivoni ajattelevi. Lähteäni laulamahan, saani sanelemahan. Sukuvirttä suoltamahan, lajivirttä laulamahan. Sanat suussani sulavat, puheet putoilevat, kielelleni kerkiävät. Hampahilleni hajoavat. Velikulta, veikkoseni, kaunis kasvinkumppalini. Lähden nyt kanssa laulamahan, saa kerran sanelemahan. Yhteen yhyttyämme, kahta alta käytyämme. Harvoin yhteen yhymme, saamme toinen toisihimme. Näillä raukoilla rajoilla, poloisilla pohjanmailla, lyökämme käsi kätehen, sormet sormien lomahan. Lauloaksemme hyviä, parahia pannaksemme. Kuulannojen, kultasien, tietä mieli tehtosien. Nuorisossa nousevassa, kansassa kasvavassa. Noita saamia sanoja, virsiä virittämiä. Vyöltä vanhan Väinämöisen, alta ahjon Ilmarisen. Päästä kalvan kaukomielen, joukahaisen jousen tiestä. Pohjan peltojen periltä, Kalevalan kankahilta. Niit ennen isoni lauloi, kirvesvartta vuollessansa. Niitä äitini opetti, päätessänsä värttinätä. Minun lasna lattialla.
Such a question, there are many possible answers, such as hard work.
Feel I'm alone in this whole of existence. I know it takes time, but I'm losing my persistence. The distance is too far to fetch, so I sketch on pages and hope that some catch the thoughts of my inverted worded music. No try.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to another episode of the New to You Show. I was one of your hosts, John Holt. You can find me on Twitter at BoardJoho, and you can find me on Instagram at board_ghost, and you can listen to my RPG podcast where Brian has been a guest on at boardghost.com. Keith, where can people find you?
You can find me at earthlingkeith.com and listen to Board Ghost. It's a good podcast, and Brian's really funny on it when he shows up. And what about you, Jules?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at BeautifulJules. And listen to Board Ghost. How about you, Brian? Where can they find you?
You can find me at almost all things A Low Roar. That's ALOWROAR.
Rawr.
On Twitter.
On Twitter, Instagram, MySpace, Vine,
Friendster.
Cool. You got,
Friendster,
you got anything fun?
Live Journal.
Anything fun you've been working on that you would want to plug?
Nothing right now. I mean, I still have some things in the docket. I also collaborate with a handful of people through punchthedevil.com, so trying to make some fun little videos through that.
Cool.
Nice.
All right. Thanks again for being on, Brian.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
So
We'll see him next week, though, so
Yeah.
don't think he's going away.
All right.
And before we get into what's up next week and getting out of here, Jules, what was new to you this week?
New to me this week was Chasing Coral. It's a new documentary by the same director as Chasing Ice, which I have not seen, but I've seen Chasing Coral, and I got to see an advanced screening of it with Q&A with the directors, and it was really good. I learned a lot about coral. And also I knew that the corals are in trouble. And this film really had me feeling it a lot more. So it was a bit of a bummer, I would say. And it's a little bit like the way they structure the docs, a little bit clumsy, but you learn a ton, and it's worth watching. It just dropped on Netflix last week, and so I would recommend putting it in your queue and checking it out.
Yeah, there was some controversy around it, right? Where they were giving audiences like coral that was like fresh, recently harvested coral as like a gift for coming to the movies.
I have not heard about that.
And then they would sneak it in, and you'd think you're eating popcorn, and it's like, oh, that was a piece of coral. Gotcha.
Well, because it worked out really well for me because they were using they had chipped off a lot of like fresh.
Yeah, it worked
Antarctic
really well
ice.
for chasing ice, but for coral, it was not as good of a marketing ploy.
They're just handing out baggies of water to everybody.
But yeah, if you want to cry and be sad that the coral's dying, it's worth checking out.
How was that Q&A?
It was really good, and they were just super genuine, and they just really want to get the message out there. I mean, that's their whole motivation, and and also even though like the film kind of leaves you bummed out, they were still they were more optimistic than I expected based on the information. So
No, is it a global look, or do they like?
it's
focus on-
global.
okay.
It's global. I mean, they focus. It's interesting
The
because
Great Barrier Reef is the main setting,
yes,
correct?
essentially, like the kind of the thrust of the story is sort of them making the film in a way. It's sort of like documenting their process of they're trying to capture like time lapses. So you see the coral dying, basically, like just because that's an impactful visual, and so they ended up sort of documenting their process of trying to capture these images, and you kind of go on this journey with them, and so it's a little bit like. So also, if you're kind of like a camera nerd and stuff, there's some neats for me that was also interesting, just like learning their process, and because they kind of had to make things up as they went along, and they had a lot of challenges along the way. But it's also like along the way they talked to a lot of scientists and experts, and they're kind of learning more about it as they're making the film and all this stuff. So you kind of go on the journey with them and learn what they learned and kind of experience it emotionally the way they did.
Is there a term for that type of documentary where it's almost not? I don't know if it's called meta.
I think
but
it's self-reflexive. I think is what they talk when the filmmakers are become part of the film
and part of the story of the passage of the information.
Yeah, and they also kind of got like one of the so they went to this like specialty camera company for them to design these special camera rigs. And one of the guys on their team who was building the camera happened to already be like a coral nut, like he already was growing his own, and he had been interested in them since he was a kid and all this stuff. So he kind of got into the project like even more so, and he ended up being kind of one of the central characters. So that was interesting. And it was really neat hearing them talk about their process and the editing process and how they ended up shaping the story and all that kind of stuff. So. From a filmmaker's perspective, that was really great. But it's also a great doc, and like I said, you learn a lot of stuff. And I recommend it.
Is it so? This is the third in this series, right?
Maybe, who knows?
But
but it's funny because
does it have Ben Affleck like the first two?
No, I don't know. It's not J.C. Amy. It's not the. That was documenting. That was documenting the dying off of the lesbians.
Yeah, as they were, or no, I was thinking it was the dying off of heterosexual girls. Oh no, they're all turning lesbian, and what's Ben Affleck's character gonna do?
Yeah,
and the time lapse photography is outstanding.
Yep. No, after Coral, there's nothing left to chase.
There's no quarter fourth thing.
I don't know, maybe. But it's funny because it was actually the guy. There was a guy who was trying to promote, trying to get the word out on the Coral, and he saw Chasing Ice, and he was like, "This is what I need to do with the Coral," and so he actually reached out to that director, and that's how this happened. Yeah.
Cool.
So
All right. Thanks, Jules.
Yep.
Where can people see it before we?
On Netflix.
All
It's
right.
an exclusive. I think they bought it outright. And,
Cool.
Yep.
All right. So before we get totally out of here, Brian, you're going to be up next week.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table for high fantasy?
I am bringing The Never-Ending Story. I've started reading the book.
Whoa.
And we could talk a little bit about the film, too, but I think it's up there. It's very high.
Yeah, we'll discuss whether or not it's truly high fantasy, guys. This might get contentious.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't bring up the difference between folk tales and fake tales.
Whoa, what's that? Well, we'll have
That's
to
a
get into it next
controversy.
week.
I'm not
Stay
getting into it.
tuned.
All right.
Let people find their own way.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
gang.
we're looking forward to it, Brian. We can't wait
Yeah,
to
it'll
hear
be
good.
more.
To learn more about the guest hosts and the subjects that we talked about, go check out newtousshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at newtoushow, where you might find posts from months and months ago. There's some explorations from
There might
last
be
century.
some links to shows we did long ago.
Yeah, seasons ago.
Yep.
In the second age. So you can find more on our New Do Show. You can contact us on Twitter. You can contact us through the website. If there's anything you want to chat to us about, shout out.
Yeah, or leave a comment
Yeah.
on iTunes too. We'll,
Yeah.
Well,
we'll
and
respond to
the
those.
the new thing is if you listen to our podcast through the official Apple Podcast app, that's where you should rate us. And
Oh,
review
nice.
us.
Oh.
Because that'll give us.
Well,
a
also,
sweet
I don't know if
bonus.
we're on there, but Spotify does podcasts now.
We
so
should be.
should
If
look
we're
into
served,
that.
I'll check it out. I think our RSS feed should be served all around. It
Yeah,
all
serve
depends on-
us.
Depends on whether there are commercials embedded. I don't know if I'll allow it. But yeah, so you can find us all through that. If you want to keep up with the show, besides checking us out on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, Twitter, where we don't really post about it, or watching the website, you can subscribe through most apps and most podcasting services. So you can it'll show up in your feed every Monday, as long as I keep posting them every Monday.
Or whenever they happen.
Yeah. So gang, more high fantasy on the way. It may not be new,
But maybe it's
new to you.
Pitiful life is all about the music. This pitiful life is all about the music. This pitiful life is all about the music. This pitiful life is all about the music.
Be with him together forever, without the limitation of time ever again. So the second coming of the Lord is not dead.